Hi guys. Today we're going to learn how to calculate standard deviation. Today's lesson and homework is going to be very heavy on calculator work, so make sure you have your calculator handy. And then just make sure that you're really paying attention to those buttons that you're hitting. It's unfortunately one small mistake on your calculator is going to snowball into a ginormous mistake by the time you get to your final answer. So you just want to be really, really careful with your problems. Before I show you an example, I'm going to run through the steps. So our first step is you have to calculate the mean. We've already talked how to do that earlier this week. You add all the numbers together and then divide by the amount of numbers you have in the list. Okay, so we've already learned that. That's step one. Okay, step two. Step two, you're going to find the difference between each value and the mean. So basically, you're going to take your entire list of numbers and you're going to subtract them from the mean, creating a new second list of numbers. I would recommend creating an entire second list. In fact, I'm going to show you when I do these problems, I actually make a table, and we're going to end up with three lists: the original list and then two more. When you're finding the difference between the value, each individual value from the data, and the mean, those are called deviations. And we usually write deviations as positive numbers. So if you subtract them from the mean and you get a negative answer, just don't write the negative on your paper. Just write the number as if it was positive. All right. After you found your list of deviations, this is where the third list comes in. So after you found all of your deviations, you want to square each deviation. Now, I would recommend squaring them all individually and then writing down those new squared numbers, because our next step is going to take each of those square numbers and find the average, find the mean of the squares of the deviations. And again, I will show you an example. I just want to make sure that we run through the steps first. Okay. So you found the mean, you subtracted every number from the mean, you squared all those numbers that you got after you were done subtracting. Now you're going to find the average of those squares. This is called the variance. Now, when we're finding this average, we're actually not going to divide by the same amount of numbers that we had in the list. We're going to divide by that amount of numbers. We're going to subtract one off of it. This accounts for sample size. And so, if you had 20 numbers in the list, when you're finding your variance, you're going to divide by 19 instead of 20. So for the mean, you can still divide by 20. But for the variance, you're going to divide by 19, or whatever, the number is minus 1. All right, guys, we're almost there. So our very last step to find standard deviation is we're going to square root the variance. And then that is our standard deviation. And then we'll talk a little bit later about what is standard deviation, why do we need to calculate it, why do we care about it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in our second video. But for right now, let's just focus on the calculations, because that's it's just a little intense. It's not difficult. You just got to be very careful, go very slowly. All right. So we have a very small sample size for our example. And so we're going to start by finding the average, the mean. So I'm going to add all the numbers together: 52, 63, 65, 77, 80, and 82. And then I will divide by 6 because there are 6 numbers in the list. So when I added them all together, I got 419. And then when I divide by 6, I get about 70. For finding standard deviation, it's best to round your mean to the nearest whole number. It's going to make the second and third steps just a lot easier to work with. So for today's homework, today's assignment, you want to round your mean to the nearest whole number. It's just going to make your life a little bit easier. All right. Our second step, we're supposed to take each of the original numbers and subtract them from the mean. So 70 minus 52 is 18. 70 minus 63 is 7. 70 minus 65 is 5. Now, when you get to the numbers that are bigger than the mean, you might want to do that number minus the mean. 77 minus 70 is 7. 80 minus 70 is 10, and 82 minus 70 is 12. Technically, what we're doing is we're finding out how far away it is from the mean. So we're writing those as positive numbers. These are called the deviations. After you found the deviations, you're going to square each of them. Some of them you already know the squares of, right? 7, you should know, is 49. 5 squared is 25. But 18, maybe you had to type that in your calculator. That's fine. That's 324. So this is all the squares of the deviations. Now, these are the next numbers that we're going to use. So we don't actually use the deviations. We use the square of the deviations. So next, I'm going to find the average of the deviations that I squared. So I'm going to add together the 324, 49, 25, 49, 100, and 144. And remember, this time we're dividing by one less. So if we divided by 6 for the mean, we're going to divide by 5 for the variance. Now this time, you can just leave the number on your calculator. Okay, so 691 divided by 5 equals, it's not that bad. It's 138.2. But if it was a really, really long decimal, just leave it on your calculator. That's fine. And then our next step is going to be to take that number and square root it. So here's how you square root a really long decimal in your calculator. This one's not bad because I can type that in. But if you want to square root the whole decimal and it takes up the entire calculator, what you do is you hit second x squared. So second and then x squared. That gets you the square root symbol right here. And then if you look down at the very, very bottom, the minus sign, above it, it says ANS. That stands for answer. So if you hit second and then the negative button, it'll say, take the square root of the answer that was just on my screen. And then we don't have to type the number in again, especially if it's a really long decimal. Okay, so square root of the answer. Again, that was second x squared, and then second the negative button. And then that will give me my standard deviation. And this time I did round it to 11.8. 11.8. All right, standard deviation. It's very calculator heavy, but not too difficult. Make sure that you're creating a chart. It'll just make your life a little bit easier. In our next video, we're going to talk about why do we care about standard deviation. So I'll see you then.